The rain came lightly, a soft rhythm against the wide windows of Emily's quiet home in Oregon. She stood near the door, her hands restless, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. It had been years since she last saw Daniel. He had been just a boy then, still figuring out life, still finding his place. But now he was coming back, no longer a boy but a man who had seen the world, a man carrying stories and secrets in his eyes. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew this moment mattered. When the knock came, it startled her. Emily opened the door, and there he was. Daniel, taller, older, his dark hair damp from the rain, shoulders broader, his smile familiar yet new. For a second, neither spoke. They just looked at each other as if trying to match the memory of who they had been with who they were now. And then, without hesitation, they stepped into each other's arms. The embrace was long, deeper than she expected. It wasn't just a welcome hug. It was a release of years of silence, of unspoken questions, of distance that had kept them apart. Emily felt his arms wrap around her with a quiet strength. For the first time in a long while, she felt the warmth of belonging. Daniel held her as if he, too, had been waiting for this moment, as if this house, this hug, was a place he had longed to return to. Inside, the air felt different. Emily led him to the living room where the fire burned gently. He set his bag down, and for a moment he just stood there, taking in the space. Breathing it in like it was more than just a house, it was memory, it was safety, it was home. His eyes softened when they landed on her again, and there was a silence between them that didn't need to be filled. It was not awkward. It was heavy with things that didn't need words. They sat down, and she studied him quietly. He looked older, yes, but there was still that same familiar light in his eyes. He began to talk. Not in long speeches, but in fragments about the places he had been, the things he had seen, the people he had lost, and the choices that had left him tired. His voice carried both weariness and hope, as though speaking to her was the first step in unburdening himself. Emily listened without interruption. She wanted to reach across the small space between them, to remind him that he wasn't alone anymore. The room glowed with the firelight, casting soft shadows across his face. And she noticed how much he had grown, not just in age, but in the way he carried himself. He wasn't the boy she remembered. He was someone new, someone who had been shaped by the world. When he finally paused, their eyes met, and that was when it happened. The quiet shift, the unspoken recognition. It wasn't only family ties that pulled them close. It was something deeper, something neither of them had expected. They had done it without realizing they had crossed into a space where the past and present collided, where reunion turned into something that felt fragile, forbidden, yet impossible to ignore. Emily excused herself for a moment. Stepping into the kitchen to gather her thoughts, she leaned against the counter, breathing slowly, reminding herself that he was her nephew, reminding herself of the line she couldn't cross. Yet her heart betrayed her. The hug they had shared lingered on her skin. The look in his eyes replayed in her mind. She closed her eyes, fighting the storm inside her. Back in the living room, Daniel sat quietly, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on the flames. When she returned, he smiled softly, and it was enough to unravel her defenses all over again. She sat beside him, closer this time, and neither spoke. The silence was alive, filled with the weight of all that had been left unsaid for years. The rain outside grew steadier. The fire crackled louder, and the house seemed to shrink around them. In that quiet, Emily knew something had begun the moment he stepped through her door. It wasn't planned, it wasn't spoken, but it was real. She didn't name it, and neither did he. But both of them felt it. A truth rising between them like the rain outside rising in rhythm. Soft, yet unstoppable. And so, as part one closed, Emily sat beside Daniel with her heart racing, realizing that his arrival had changed everything. What they did the moment he walked in, holding each other after years of silence, was more than just a family reunion. It was a spark of something they could no longer deny. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, and the house was wrapped in the quiet comfort of evening. Daniel sat near the fireplace, his eyes following the flickering flames, while Emily moved around the room with a soft grace, pouring tea into 2 cups. The smell of mint rose in the air, fresh and calming, yet her hands trembled slightly as she set the cups down. She told herself it was only from the long day, but she knew it was something else. Daniel thanked her and took a sip, his gaze resting on her as if he wanted to memorize the details of her face. She avoided his eyes at first, pretending to be interested in the firewood stacked neatly beside the hearth. But soon she gave in and looked at him. The years had changed him, yet the kindness she remembered was still there, now mixed with something heavier sorrow, perhaps, or longing. He spoke about his time away, not in grand stories, but in small pieces, as if each word was carefully chosen. He told her how he had worked hard, how he had thought he found love but lost it. Now disappointment had followed him like a shadow. Emily listened intently, her heart aching for him. She wanted to reach across the small distance between them and take his pain away, but she stayed still, her fingers wrapped tightly around her cup. When he admitted how lonely he had been, his voice cracked slightly, and that sound pierced through her more than his words. She looked at him with an intensity she could not hide. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. For a moment, the words hung in the air, heavier than she intended, filled with meaning that went beyond comfort. Daniel's eyes searched hers. The silence stretched into something deeper than conversation. The firelight painted their faces in soft gold. The shadows in the room seemed to push them closer together, even though neither moved. Emily noticed the way his shoulders relaxed, as if her presence had lifted some weight off him. She noticed how his smile was faint but real, a rare smile that carried gratitude. In that instant, she felt a warmth rise in her chest, and it frightened her. She looked away quickly, but the feeling remained. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on her. "You haven't changed," he said suddenly. "You still look the same. If anything, you look more yourself." His voice was quiet, but the words struck her like a sudden flame. Emily felt her throat tighten. Compliments from him had always felt different, even years ago when he was younger. But now, the weight of his words was stronger, more dangerous. She wanted to reply, to brush it off with a laugh, but her voice refused to come. Instead, she placed her cup down and folded her hands in her lap. Daniel didn't look away. His gaze held hers, steady and unafraid, as if he wanted her to understand something he wasn't ready to say aloud. The room felt charged, as if the air itself carried secrets. The fire crackled, the rain tapped against the windows, but neither sound broke the tension between them. Emily's heart raced. She reminded herself that he was family, that boundaries existed, that she had to be careful. But feelings were not so simple, and the storm inside her grew louder than the storm outside, to break the moment. She asked about his travels, about the cities he had seen. He answered, his voice steady, but his eyes still carried the same softness when they looked at her. He described crowded streets, lonely hotel rooms, nights where he felt like a stranger to everyone around him. Emily listened, and with each word, her chest tightened more. She had known loneliness herself, had walked through empty days after her divorce, had wondered if love had left her forever. Hearing his story felt like hearing her own reflected back at her. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The fire dimmed, the clock ticked softly, and still they sat there, lost in the quiet rhythm of sharing. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they stayed silent, but the silence was never empty. It was filled with a pull that neither of them acknowledged, yet neither of them resisted. At one point, Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his face close to hers. "You know," he said slowly, "I didn't just come here because I needed a place to stay. I came because I missed this. I missed you." His words were simple, but they fell into the space between them like a confession. Emily's breath caught, her body tense, her mind racing. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand clarity, but her lips refused to move. Instead, she lowered her gaze, afraid of what her eyes might reveal if she met his again. The weight of his words lingered, echoing inside her. She had missed him too, more than she had admitted even to herself. His presence now filled a void she had carried for years, and it scared her to realize how much she needed it. The night grew heavier. The house was quiet, except for the faint crackle of the last embers in the fireplace. Emily stood, saying she should bring more wood, but Daniel gently stopped her, taking her hand for the briefest second. "Stay," he said softly. The touch was light, innocent in appearance, yet it sent a rush through her veins. She pulled her hand back quickly, her heart hammering. But the moment had already happened. She sat again, her body tense, her thoughts spinning. Daniel leaned back, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it longing? Or was it gratitude? Perhaps both. She wanted to believe it was only the second, but the way her heart are. The night had grown still, the rain outside reduced to a soft mist, and the silence inside the house felt almost too heavy. Emily stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. The air was cool, the moon pale against the drifting clouds. She needed space to breathe, to calm the storm inside her chest. She told herself it was only exhaustion, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But she knew the truth. Something had shifted between her and Daniel, and she could no longer ignore it. Daniel followed quietly, his footsteps light on the wooden floorboards. She turned slightly when she heard him, her eyes glistening in the dim light. He stood beside her, leaning against the railing, his expression unreadable, but his presence strong, steady. For a moment, neither spoke. The garden below lay still, silvered by the moonlight, and the silence stretched, filled with all the words they had been too afraid to say. Finally, Daniel's voice broke the stillness, low and uncertain. "Emily," he began, his eyes on the night sky, "there's something I've carried for years. Something I never said because I thought it was wrong. Or maybe because I was afraid of what it would mean." His words trembled. But he didn't stop. Emily turned to him fully now, her heart racing. She wanted to stop him, to protect both of them from what might come next, but she couldn't. She waited, her hands gripping the edge of her shawl. He looked at her then, his gaze steady, his voice firmer. "All this time I thought of you as more than just family. You were the one who was always there, the one who cared when no one else did. I know it's not simple. I know it's not what people would understand, but I can't keep pretending anymore. Being here with you, it feels like the only place I belong." His confession struck her like a wave. She felt the air leave her lungs, her heart pounding in her ears. She should have spoken immediately, should have reminded him of the boundaries between them. But the truth inside her wouldn't let her. His words mirrored the feelings she had buried deep, the feelings she had been too ashamed to face. Her lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, you don't know what you're saying?" But even as she spoke, her eyes betrayed her. The fear in them wasn't rejection, it was recognition. She was afraid because she felt the same. Daniel stepped closer, his movements slow, careful, as if he was giving her every chance to walk away. "I do know," he said firmly. "I've known for years. I kept it hidden, thinking it would fade, but it never did. And now, being here with you, it's stronger than ever." Emily's hands trembled. She wanted to push him away, to draw a line in the sand, but her heart betrayed her again. She whispered, broken yet honest, "I don't know if this is right, but I can't deny it. I feel it too." The words slipped out. In the moment they did, the world around them changed. The air seemed to thicken, the night heavier with longing and fear. For a second, neither moved. They stood in the pale moonlight, caught between duty and desire, between what the world expected and what their hearts demanded. Daniel's hand brushed against hers, light as air, hesitant, as if asking for permission. Emily didn't pull away, though. Every thought in her mind screamed that she should. Her chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths, and her eyes glistened as she looked up at him. The silence was unbearable. The tension was too sharp. Emily finally broke it, her voice trembling. "We can't. This can't happen." Yet even as she said it, she didn't step back. Her words were weak, and both of them knew it. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then tell me to leave. Tell me to forget this, and I will." His eyes searched hers, waiting, begging for an answer. Emily froze. She could have ended it then, with one firm word. She could have told him to stop, to leave, to bury everything he felt, but she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, her silence gave him all the answer he needed. The moment stretched endlessly. The garden lights flickered in the distance, the air cooled against their skin, and the world outside seemed far away. Daniel's hand finally closed over hers, gentle, steady, real. Emily closed her eyes, letting herself feel the truth she had denied for so long, and then, just as the weight of the moment threatened to tip into something more, there was a sudden sound inside the house. A creak on the stairs, the shifting of wood, a reminder that the world was still there, watching. Ready to catch them if they stepped too far, Emily pulled her hand back quickly, her heart racing as though she had been caught in something dangerous. She turned away, her face flushed, her breath unsteady. Daniel took a step back too, his jaw tight, his eyes still burning with what had just passed between them. Neither spoke. The interruption had broken the fragile thread, but it hadn't erased it. If anything, it had made it stronger, sharper, impossible to ignore. Emily walked back inside, her shawl pulled tightly around her, her mind in chaos. Daniel followed more slowly, his steps heavy with the weight of all that had been said. The house was silent again. But the silence was no longer safe. It was charged alive, echoing with the confession that could never be taken back. That night, as Emily lay in her bed, she stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His words replayed over and over, her own admission haunting her. She had crossed a line with her heart, even if her hands had not, and she knew without doubt that nothing between them would ever be the same again. The night dragged slowly into dawn, and Emily sat at the edge of her bed, her hands pressed tightly together, her eyes fixed on the faint light spilling through the curtains. Sleep had refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel on the porch, heard his voice confessing what should never have been spoken, felt her own words slipping from her lips. "I feel it too." She had meant it. She knew it was true, and that truth terrified her. Downstairs, Daniel had not slept either. He sat in the living room, staring at the cold fireplace, the ashes soft and gray. He had spoken the words he had carried for years, words that had burned inside him. He expected rejection, anger, maybe even shame. But instead, she had confessed to, and that was what shook him most. He wasn't alone in this. She felt it as deeply as he did, and that made the air between them heavier than ever. When morning finally came, Emily stepped softly into the kitchen, trying to move as though everything were normal. She brewed coffee, set the cups on the counter, and tried to steady her breathing. Daniel entered quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them was filled with everything they had left hanging the night before. Finally, Emily pushed a cup toward him. "We can't ignore what happened," she said softly, her voice trembling, but steady enough to break the silence. Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "I know, but we also can't pretend it isn't real. You felt it. It's there, and it won't disappear just because we're afraid." Her hands tightened around the edge of the counter. "That's the problem," she whispered. "It is real, and that makes it dangerous. People wouldn't understand. Maybe even we don't understand. If we let this go further, it could ruin us both." Daniel stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Then let it ruin me. I've spent years running, years pretending I didn't feel this, and I can't do it anymore. You're the only place I've ever felt at home. Don't ask me to turn away from that now." Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to be strong, to remind him of the line they should never cross. But the truth was, she was tired of being strong. Life had already taken so much from her love, trust, the dream of a family that never lasted. And here, standing in front of her, was the one person who made her feel alive again. Was it wrong to want that? Was it selfish to hold on to something that might finally heal her? Emily turned away, walking toward the window. The sun was rising slowly, painting the sky in soft gold. She watched the light spread across the street, and for a moment, she felt the weight of choice pressing down on her shoulders. She could push him away, lock her heart back in its cage, and go on living safely, but empty. Or she could take the risk, open the door to something forbidden but real. something that might destroy them or save them. Behind her, Daniel spoke again, softer now. We don't have to decide everything today. But we can't keep pretending nothing's changed. Last night, it changed everything. She turned then, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She crossed the room slowly, stopping just a step away from him. If we choose this, she said, her voice breaking, there's no going back. We'll live with the weight of it forever. Daniel's reply was simple. Then I'll carry it with you. The honesty in his voice broke through her last defense. She closed her eyes, letting the silence fill the space between them. For a moment, time seemed to stop the world outside, moving on. Unaware of the storm inside their hearts, she reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. The touch was small, barely there, but it was enough. Enough to say she wasn't walking away. Enough to admit that whatever rules they had lived by before no longer held power here. They stood there, bound by a truth they could no longer escape. And though neither spoke another word, both knew that their story had only begun. The future was uncertain, the path dangerous. But from the moment Daniel had walked through her door, their lives had shifted forever. That morning, as the sun climbed higher, Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. Not because the choice was easy, but because it was honest. She and Daniel had stepped into something they could not undo. It would test them. It would haunt.